Hi, my name is Ryan Fleming. I have my master's in social work from Florida Atlantic University, and I wanted to speak about Erik Erikson's stages of development. It's a theory. So what Erikson is saying is how your personality is actually developed within stages of your life, and your life is broken down in 8 different stages. The first one is trust versus mistrust. That's from infancy to 18 months. Second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. That is from 18 months to 3 years. Third one is initiative versus guilt. That's around preschool to 3 to 5. So, stage four, industry versus inferiority. Middle school years, so 6 to 11. Stage five, identity versus confusion. That's teen years, 12 to 18. Intimacy versus isolation, 18 to 40 years old. As you see, this is like the bigger margin, the largest margin. Stage seven is generativity versus stagnation. Ages 40 to 65. And the last stage, stage eight, integrity versus despair. And that is from 65 years to death. So the main two that I wanted to speak about and talk about is identity versus confusion, which is from 12 to 18, and that's the fifth stage. And then the sixth stage, intimacy versus isolation, and that's from 18 to 40. For identity versus role confusion, think about where you at. High school. So you got social relationships being the most important thing at that time. Extracurricular activities, what you're doing, who you're hanging with, stuff like that. And the outcome of that will be fidelity. So this takes place in the teenage years. The essential role is developing a sense of personal identity, which will continue to influence behavior and development for the rest of the person's life. So I chose this part because at that time, high school, what were you really focused on? I mean, I did my academics, but for the most part, it was definitely a more social thing about, being around a certain crowd or um, based on my experiences, who I gravitated towards and stuff like that, um, finding my identity and stuff. And according to Erikson, it says teens need to develop a sense of self and personal identity. Success leads to the ability to stay true to yourself, while failure leads to role confusion and a weak sense of self. So I chose this pretty much to think about all the people you went to high school with, or the people you went to high school with, um, who was something, and now you see where they're at 10, 8 years later. They kicking themselves, or life is, life is life. And um, I want to specifically focus on that because it's literally telling us people going with this identity that's created in high school and pretty much thinking that's their persona, and as time transpired, they are getting confused. It's identity versus confusion. When you do have healthy social relationships and whatnot, success is usually the outcome. Fidelity is usually the outcome. When that is failed, it transpires into confusion. Think about how many people incarcerated are actually geniuses, but the environment that they're placed in, the social friends that they were looking for, the people that they gravitated towards. They think about the environment. So, say if you're coming from the hood, um, it's geniuses in the hood, but it's not something that's really pushed. And you find yourself around the wrong people, and creating this whole embodiment of, okay, this is who I am, and actually, like, that's not who you are at all. And later on within the years, you see a lot of people doing soul searching, um, journeys, and things like that. So, like when a psychologist talks about identity, they're referring to all of the beliefs, ideas, values that help shape and guide a person's behavior. When you complete this stage, it successfully leads to fidelity, which is the ability to live by society's standards and expectations. So that's when you go into the ego identity. This is very important. It's the conscious self, it's the conscious sense of self that we develop through social interactions and becomes a central focus during the identity versus confusion stage of psychosocial development. Our ego identity constantly changes due to new experiences and information we acquire in our daily interactions with others. As we have new experiences, we also take on challenges that can help or hinder development of identity. So back to what I was saying originally, it's the people who are always true to themselves who tend to be doing much more well in life. And I'm not talking about finances or nothing like that, um, but just being mentally sound. It's the ones who were true to themselves, who were discovering themselves, who were, switching up. I mean, I did volleyball, then wrestling and chess. I did a whole bunch of stuff, but I was also outside in the street and stuff like that, meeting different people and whatnot. Um, and that helped shape my identity, like meeting these other people versus just being in one environment and just being exposed to that specific person. Like, I got mentors, professors, and I done been around a lot of different individuals and received different perspectives. So the next stage is intimacy versus isolation. That is from 19 years old to 40 years old. This is the margin I'm in with, like, right now. So intimacy versus isolation. So young adults need to form intimate, loving relationship with other people. Success leads to strong relationships, while failure results in loneliness and isolation. This stage covers the period of early adulthood when people are exploring personal relationships. Each step builds on skills learned from the previous step. So, what Erikson is saying is that a strong sense of personal identity was important for developing intimate relationships. Keyword: a strong sense of personal identity was important for developing intimate relationships. How does that apply to today? You got people who get into relationships and don't have the slightest idea who they are as a person, and they wonder why it never works. Think about it. You gotta sit, take the time, discover yourself, know yourself, and then that's when you come to someone, you give them yourself because you know exactly what you can tolerate, you know exactly what you can't tolerate, and this should be communicated in the early phases. I mean, you live your truth, you know who you are as a person, and you own up to it. Um, and you pretty much express that, you pretty much pour that out into the world and form relationships and bonds from that. And um, keyword, they're saying intimate. So intimate is just another word, closeness. Intimacy is not always sex. It's not always something physical. So the tough conversations, quality time, sense of understanding. All these are things, forms of intimacy. Regular communication, constant communication, intimacy. So according to studies, it demonstrated that people with a poor sense of self tend to have less committed relationships and are more likely to struggle with emotional isolation, loneliness, and depression. Those with a poor sense of self tend to have less committed relationships. Less committed. Not no relationship at all. Less committed. Cheaters. Um, People who fear committed, who fear commitment. Um, Relationship is not as serious. The people who want relationships to be fun, people who have a sense of self and know themselves, know that relationships are serious. It's not always fun and games, but aside from that, um, they are more likely to struggle with emotional isolation, loneliness, depression. And why is that? Because if you don't know sense of self, more than likely you're going around um, hurting people. And who wants to be with someone or deal with someone like that? Only a person who's just as toxic or just as hurt or just as gullible, just as lost. And unfortunately, I ain't gonna say it's a lot, but it's a lot of people who claim they know themselves but don't have the slightest idea who they are until they come across someone with a strong sense of self and able to communicate these things. Hey, if they want the intimate relationship, of course. Hey, I think you need to work on this. I think you should work on that. Um, a real relationship, I should say. Um, they don't know how to receive it. So isolation comes, loneliness, depression, and the stages keep going. It's a consequence to each stage. It's like, so if you don't develop here, it's like you're gonna suffer somewhere else. Is what Erikson's saying. And there's an age limit on it, of course, because in the previous stage, which is identity versus confusion, that is from 12 to 18. Pay attention to stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. It's 19 years old to 40 years old. It's one of the largest margins, and it's large for a reason. Because think about 19 to 40 years old. The decisions you make at 19, most people high school sweetheart, they're not focused on career, and some people, not all. Um, and they transcend into their older years. They're like, I never sat down and got to think about who I am, and their relationship is falling apart. The key thing is creating that sense of identity and owning up to and knowing that this is who I am. And then the relationships around you, that's when you pick and choose and form stronger relationships. So successful resolution of this stage 6, intimacy versus isolation, results in the virtue known as love. It is marked by the ability to form lasting, meaningful relationships with other people. 19 to 40, form lasting, meaningful relationships with other people. And then for my people specifically, wonder why it's a disconnection, because a lot of relationships aren't meaningful. It's mainly transactional. Sometimes for to fill a void, sometimes for finances, sometimes just for personal pleasures. It's not really no deep meaning. Don't really know each other. And then you bamboozled when you find out who this person is, because you never took the time to actually sit and know this person, let alone this person doesn't even know themselves. They're still growing, they're still molding. And it's a process, it's a journey, but it's also a risk. So, and it's very early, from 19 to 40 years of age. Most people get their stuff together around what, 30, when they closer to somewhat midlife crisis, I guess. Some people get it early, sense of identity. This is who I am. I'm not changing it. Like me personally, Carver Ranches, Hollywood, Florida, certain stuff embedded in me. I can't change that if I tried. I can make progression and stuff like that, but just certain stuff about me just not changing. Um, and I'm aware of that. So I could communicate that and form relationships with other people as well who could understand that, who could grasp that. And if not, it's a new experience and they'll learn that. But it all goes back to sense of identity. You can't form no intimate relationship without having a sense of identity. And most people are confused.